For approximately 60 years after the Nazis and their helpers killed two-thirds of the Jews living in Europe and started a war that killed upwards of 60 million people, anti-Semitism was a discredited ideology, particularly in the United States. Europe, well, I don't know. Mainstream media outlets may not have done such a good job of covering Israel in the United States, but at least they didn't give anti-Semites too much of a sympathetic hearing. Sometimes they got some headway, but for the most part, the big three networks and the major market dailies, the newspapers, treated anti-Semites as crazies who needed to be kept in check. Anti-Semites were always present on the fringes, but most of them had a tough time accessing larger audiences. Every once in a while, one of them would sneak into the mainstream, but then somebody like Bill Buckley would say, "No, you're out," and they would kick him out of National Review. Unfortunately, those days are over. Now anybody with a web camera can connect with thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of fans on the internet, and they can also solicit donations from their supporters. And sadly enough, two of the worst examples of this phenomenon are Christians. One example is a Christian news organization called True News, led by Rick Wiles. And I first ran into True News at the 2018 Christ at the Checkpoint Conference in Bethlehem, an anti-Israel event organized by Palestinian Christians, most of them affiliated with Bethlehem Bible College. And I've been to 5 of those conferences over the years. I need more Valium as I come back from all of those, but I don't take Valium, but I still need it. Conference organizers gave True News the run of the place, and during the conference, Wiles told his viewers that Israeli Jewish rabbis are just like Judas looking for a political savior who will rule a political kingdom on earth, a super race that will dominate the planet. That's really what Zionism is all about. And he also declared that if Jesus himself walked the streets of Jerusalem again, they would release Barabbas and they would crucify Jesus. Nothing has changed. And the thing is that YouTube, they basically discredited themselves and they were kicked off of YouTube. But that's only going to add to the organization's credibility amongst its hardcore followers. The fact is the organization has a critical mass of followers so that it will support the organization's ministry for years to come. And they're going to follow Wiles and True News to other platforms. And that brings a problem. You know, on one hand, it seems like a reasonable thing that you want to deplatform people, but at the same time, it incites their base. For example, one person who has come to the defense of True News is a Catholic anti-Semite by the name of E. Michael Jones. And like Rick Wiles, he's been able to use internet technology to broadcast his hate to a large number of disaffected young men here in the United States. And one of the things that Lori asked about what do we do, and I think is that one of the things that we have to do is we have to figure out a way to get to those angry young men before Rick Wiles and E. Michael Jones do. That's really what it comes down to, and as evangelists, that's your calling. And one of the things that E. Michael Jones does is he goes around telling people that the Jews are essentially the source of every problem in the world. And the thing is that if you're a young, disaffected young man who's had a tough time making his way into the world, kind of like, the men who came back from World War I in Germany, well, that's a pretty good story to buy into. Now, the thing is that Bishop Kevin Rhodes, who serves the diocese where Jones lives and worships, has come out against Jones's rants in a statement that was issued last week. But the thing is that even E. Michael Jones is going to say, look, they got to him too, because anytime the Jewish community or the pro-Israel community is successful in basically challenging this anti-Semitism in an administrative way or something like that, they'll say, look, the Jews control everything. And so what happens is that I think on one hand, deplatforming these people may in fact be a reasonable thing to do, but then even at the same time, there's another part of me that says that maybe it's counterproductive. Because when they get deplatformed, Wiles and Jones, they can and will say, look at what those Zionists have done, and they are undermining our democracy and our right to free speech. And this brings me to another part of the story that I'm here to tell, is that Christian peacemaking organizations have regularly promoted this very notion that somehow the Jews control the media or the discourse in the United States in an unhealthy way. And one of the things they do is they point to the success against the BDS campaign. When states pass laws opposing BDS, what it does is it feeds into the narrative that the Jews control everything, and what it does is that it gives them more an ability to whip up their base. It grieves me to say this, but So-called Christian peacemakers have been the primary facilitators and enablers of anti-Semitism in the West and have been for the past few decades, and Dr. Miller talked about this. What happens is that they affirm the Palestinian vendetta narrative against Israel. And I use the word vendetta consciously because it appears in the Palestinian national anthem. And it doesn't compare very well with the Israel's national anthem, which you know is entitled, most of you know, is the Hope in Hebrew. Organizations such as the World Council of Churches, Churches for Middle East Peace, and those are the two people that I've been writing about most recently, they affirm basically this grievance and vendetta narrative put forth by Palestinian elites and translate it and soften it for Western ears. And they sand off explicit anti-Semitism and leave the overall grievance and vendetta narrative intact. And they promote self-determination for the Palestinians, whose elites have denied the Jewish right to self-determination time and time again. And that's really one of the interesting things. I've been reading Harry Jaffe's book, Crisis of a House Divided, and another book that he wrote, I can't remember. I've got it probably right here behind me, Birth of a New Freedom. And one of the things that Abraham Lincoln said is that, look, if you think that you can lay claim to the rights enunciated in the Declaration of Independence and own slaves at the same time, you're basically contradicting it. And the same logic applies to Palestinian statehood. If the Palestinians are going to lay claim to the right of self-determination, they have to acknowledge the Jewish right to self-determination. And every peacemaker has an absolute obligation to keep reminding the Palestinians of that reality. And the thing is that you cannot logically affirm the narrative and then be taken seriously when you condemn anti-Semitism. And that's really one of the things that is most troublesome. So why am I talking about the World Council of Churches and Churches for Middle East Peace in the same breath as Rick Wiles and E. Michael Jones? Because these groups prepared the way for these haters. Both Wiles and Jones lifted their talking points about Israel from the progressive pro-Palestinian Christian peace movement. So what do? Well, this is what I think. Christianity presents its followers with a choice. We can join our suffering with that of Christ on the cross, embrace the demands of forgiveness, or we can align our own personal grievances and our own rage with the vendetta narrative of the mob. And the thing is that this is really the question that we have to present to followers of Jesus. Are you going to align your suffering with that of Christ, or are you going to align or combine your rage with the mob that put Christ on the cross? And the thing is that you can't claim to support human rights when you align your activism with the interest of a political movement that demands the right of self-determination while denying it to the Jewish people. And you can't affirm, even in an oblique way, the soundness of the Palestinian vendetta narrative against Israel and claim to promote peace and forgiveness in the Holy Land. And so I think that's really what we need to do, is just to keep hammer away on that message. Thank you.